So I guess the impetus for this poem that I want to improvise comes from a lot of different directions. And one of those directions, I suppose, is I was thinking about Eric Adams and his idea that New York City Mayor Eric Adams and his program to involuntarily institutionalize homeless, residents of New York City, particularly, those who are targeted as vagrant subway users, and one of the things that that Adams programmatic assault on displaced New Yorkers reminded me of was that when I used to live in when I lived in Astoria, and this was I'll talk about a period that is from probably somewhere between 1996 and I know that it was prior to 1999, because in 1999 I had begun a series of performance work that my viewers and audience will be familiar with, called Acts. And in 1999 I began the first act of this series called Acts, which was to become I don't know if I can really use the word voluntary, to to become admitted, right, to various hospitals and participate in the experience of what it is to live as an individual diagnosed with a mental illness in our contemporary America, and it was a response to the series of performances was a response to the transformation of the old mental asylum on what was once called Blackwell's Island, that had various names over time: Ward's Island, Welfare Island, Roosevelt Island is what it continues to be called into the present, and this asylum was renovated and transformed right into luxury living, apartments, with 500 units of luxury living apartments, and it struck me that the history and the horror of this place was being not overlooked and forgotten, but exploited for profit, and so I began this piece in response to that, and ideally I would have spent my mental health internment and residence on Roosevelt Island, but there are no hospitals and institutions that currently dispose of individuals with neurological differences that today we refer to as mental illness, and referred to variously in various ways over time. There is no place in which individuals are displaced because they bear some relationship with that performative of mental illing, right? That the psychiatric professionals and doctors maintain authority over, meaning that that if one has a diagnosis, that effectively, that positionality is granted to one, and all the entailments that positionality carries with it, are carried by the one who is performatively mentally illed. I'm using it as a verb, right? And for more on performativity, that there's more on my site, and you can look at J.L. Austin, or what Judith Butler does with J.L. Austin, and how the idea of performativity evolves as in various ways. But usually when I utilize it, I utilize it in the form the following way. A kind of naming, right, in which the naming grants a certain ontological status to a human, or other sentient entity, and that status, right, is not only conveyed through language and the naming, but performed by someone who has the authority to perform such naming and such granting of status, and in some cases the status is granted without an authority, but for purposes of marriage and diagnosis and other kinds of namings of positionalities, a professional is usually required. And so I was thinking about that work, and I was thinking about someone someone who I knew when I lived in Astoria. His name was John, and John was homeless, and John, I don't know whether John had a diagnosis or not, but he would have been one of these individuals whom Eric Adams currently wants to target and displace into some institutional setting, right? And I would often see John. This was I was still in graduate school at the time, because I left graduate school to perform this series of performances and projects, and I was in graduate school, and I was in the process of writing my dissertation, which was on music and image relations in and some not limited to music, but sound in a certain sense, but particularly sound as not non-dialogue, right? In a certain sense, the aestheticization of sound. So birdsong could be considered music, or voices could be considered music as well, if they're not dialogue in the strict sense. But you basically get the idea. But particularly the relationships that were asynchronous, or bless you, that's Leo sneezing in the background, or in some way semantically or semiotically askew, and I was interested in the phenomenological components of putting disparate elements together, and how that the human mind does that, and what results when it does do that. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about John, and how he would have been targeted by these recent policies that Eric Adams seems to want to insist upon, and of course we all know what the reason for it is because certain kinds of human beings are regarded by certain kinds of members of polite and socially privileged and economically economically privileged and secure, members of our society as being unsightly and unclean and unwholesome and and not worthy of space in our society. And so I thought about John and since I was in graduate school at the time that I knew him. I remember there was one night, and I used to come home late, and I would take the last train from SUNY Stony Brook, is where I was going to school, and I think that train left at 11:30, if memory serves, and in the wintertime it was really cold, and I would stand on the platform, and often it would be windy and cold, and I had this really protective wool jacket that had been my grandfather's jacket, and I had inherited when he passed, and so I had inherited that jacket. I think it was in 1992, and this was sometime. I know that it was after 1995, because I hadn't moved to Astoria until then, and I imagine sometime between 1996 and probably 1998, or perhaps closer to when I actually began the performance of the various segments of the acts. So possibly 1999, but I was coming home, and I'd taken the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan, and then caught a subway back to Astoria, and then it was very cold, and there was ice on the ground, and snow on the ground, and the wind was really rough, and the wind chill was creating a lot, and John was out, and he looked wet, and he wasn't wearing a jacket, and I remember stopping him and asking him if he was okay, and he said I'm okay, but his nose was running, and he was obviously really cold, and probably freezing into his face. Bless you, that's Leo again. And so I said, do you need anything? And he said, no. And so I said, do you need my jacket? Will you take my jacket? And he said, no, I'm okay. No, I'm okay. And this is how John was, because he was a good, human being. And some people, perhaps like Eric Adams, don't understand how individuals who are displaced and provided with these, performative positionalities, enacted by professionals, can be good, human beings, and what would the signs would be that they are good human beings. But he obviously was, and I also recall asking him under other conditions if he needed anything, or if he wanted a sandwich, or if he needed anything to stay warm, and he would say no. So I had this solution, for to getting around, John's goodness, when he was in need, and it was instead of offering him things, I would leave things for him. So over the next couple of weeks, I left him that wool jacket, and I could tell when John was coming, because Lori and I lived in this brownstone, and it was 4-story. We're on the 4th floor. And sort of toward the corner, we were on 31 and 36th. So 31 Avenue. I can't remember which way the avenues went and which way the streets went. And it's only been, I don't know how long has it been. It's been less than 20 years, since I lived there. But I getting confused. But I think it was. I think it was, 31 Avenue, whatever it was, whether that was the street or the other one, but we were on, I believe it was the avenue. We were on the avenue between, or the street. This is how my memory works. It has some difficulty with these kinds of things sometimes. But we were between between Broadway and 30th, and both Broadway and 30th were, largely, commercial, and particularly had a lot of restaurants, but other commercial venues as well. And then the side street was 36, and then from 36 down to 30th. No, not 30th. Or maybe it was 30th again, along which the subway line ran. There were a lot of commercial venues, again, and I could see, I could see that corner and the commercial. That's the part of 31st that, and the side of that 31st that we were on is the same side as the restaurant, the Greek restaurant Xenon is on. Wonderful restaurant Xenon, and if it's still there, I haven't, even I don't know. I imagine that it is. It's too good a restaurant to go out of business. But Xenon was towards the corner where we were, on the other side of 36, and then on the far corner was a deli and sundry store, called a Darsh, and we used to go there, and sometimes I could get John to take a sandwich or something that I would pay for at a Darsh, so I could see him, and I could see him, walking, towards, the corner where I was, from the window. And the reason that I was looking out, the window was because I kind of knew that he had a certain kind of schedule for walking, and I was, hoping to see him, and when I did see him, I ran out, real quickly, grabbed the jacket, and I did this a couple of times, for John, and I would, take whatever I wanted. In this case, it was the jacket, and I would leave it in the snow around the corner, because he had this route, and he would walk around the corner, and so I'd run out and get down to the down the 4 flights outside, and he was a slow walker. He wasn't unfit. He just had a way of kind of rambling along, and I'd leave it for him, and then I'd run back into the apartment, and then a couple hours later check and see if it was gone, and if I could, I'd watch the TV. Took it, and I accomplished, that goal a couple of times, in spite of, John's refusal to accept anything, by just leaving it out in the snow. And then I did this with $5 bills as well, that I would, toss onto the snow in real, in an obvious place where he would have to see it in the snow as he, after he rounded the corner. And so I was thinking of that, and I was thinking of, unusual, or solutions outside the box, to questions like this this human need question, right, of providing home and shelter, for the homeless, rather than institutionalization and hospitalization, right? That is a result of these, medical performatives that Eric Adams, seems to have no problem with, as long as it gets these homeless people, out of our sight, right, and out of our sight and mind, so that they don't become, they are no longer part of our social environment. And so I thought, I already have the solution to this, and the solution is, really, kind of belongs to that project of mine, the various segments of ACTs. And my becoming familiar with the asylum and its new function, right, as luxury living apartments. And so I read in this NPR article on National Public Radio site that Eric Adams had 470, displaced homeless individuals, diagnosed with severe mental illness, or perhaps not severe, but diagnosed with some kind of, mental illness, arrested and relocated last year, and that number 470 really rang a bell, because I thought of Roosevelt Island, and I thought of Roosevelt Island, and I remembered that Roosevelt Island had 500 residences, and presumably each one of those 470 individuals, if the mayor would just appropriate the old asylum from whatever venture capitalist now currently owns it, and is exploiting it for purposes of probably needless hoarding of capital, and so I thought, well, so I asked my wife Lori, who, in addition to being a grammar and middle school teacher, is also a legal historian, and I asked her if there were any precedent for appropriating or reappropriating privately owned property that's utilized as a rental property from its designated owner. And she said, well, sure, yeah, obviously. And there is, she explained to me, there's a kind of eminent domain provision for the use of such properties if they're needed to combat human oppression and human oppression, exploitation, and harm, and she said certainly something like this would provide the legal justification for the appropriation or reappropriation of this property and its use as a place, right? An alternative, thinking outside the box, an alternative to hospitalization and institutionalization for these individuals who Eric Adams is currently targeting and removing from the streets and displacing into hospitals. So I thought ironically the old asylum that once, and we'll get some images of it at some point, because I plan on doing more than one piece on this. But the old asylum that was once used as a containment device for these displaced individuals to get them out of society could now serve the purpose of luxury living, and I think this this is entirely justified, right, by the history of abuse and neglect and harm that individuals such as John have suffered at the hands of individuals such as Eric Adams. And so I was thinking about that, and then I somehow remembered that this site, which is an artist's statement, I won't mention any names, but this is called Statement 9, and I guess that kind of rhymes with Project 9, or but Statement 9, which is a kind of artist statement, and I remembered that Statement 9 is a view, right, of I believe it's a view of Roosevelt Island, and I guess the reason that I regard it as a view of Roosevelt Island and if it is a view of Roosevelt Island, it would be a view from Socrates Park. And Socrates Park is one of my favorite all-time parks, and I spent a lot of time there in addition to Roosevelt Island, particularly when I was performing the first act. And sometimes I would do acts on in Socrates Park, in addition to doing the acts on Roosevelt Island. But the reason that I think that it's Roosevelt Island in particular is that this tower, seems to be the old lighthouse tower on, and also restored. I don't know what year, that restoration was made, but on the tip of, Roosevelt Island, and this, seems to be the tip of the island, which would situate it perfectly. And these buildings look a lot like the buildings on Roosevelt Island. And there's no, I can't see the luxury, living asylum, the hexagonal tower, from here, and we'll take a look at that, in later pieces. But I can identify, at least, or perhaps I'm misidentifying it, but it does look like Roosevelt Island. And maybe if I clicked on this image, which I'm not going to do, but maybe if I did, it would clarify. There'd be a title for it, and a title for the JPEG or whatever it is, and maybe that title would clarify that this either is or isn't Roosevelt Island. But we're going to take it as, Roosevelt Island, whether it is or isn't. And I guess, because of this image and the fact that it's an artist statement and statement 9, and perhaps because of a few other things as well, I thought, I like to set up these kinds of projects like that that explore poetry as something improvisatory, improvisatory performances of poetry. And usually I'll have like some kind of a method or an operation, like that I employ, like some kind of whether it involves like production, of anagrams, or whether it is verbal repetition, or whether I drop out certain letters, but it's procedural. Like I'll develop like this procedural method, and then and kind of apply it. And I was thinking, well, what if, and that what if is kind of like my if x was y, and the if x was y method, and concept, right, comes out of Jimi Hendrix, his song, if 6 was 9, which I think makes a certain amount of sense in relationship to all these other thoughts. But if 6 was 9, it has become part of the way that space-time travel coordinates are articulated in the receipt and communication of space-time travel coordinates as messages. And so anyone really familiar with the site and the way that space-time travel communication coordinates work, know that to communicate with us, all 6s are translated into 9s, and all 9s are translated or transformed, grammatical transformation of 6s into 9s and 9s into 6s. And that plays out in a variety of different ways, and has a variety of different meanings and strategies that are used across a variety of different methods and procedures. But I thought that, and I thought well, if 6 was 9, what if there were a kind of like grammatical infidelity, or grammatical error that was a specific disability. So this is, of course, like kind of like imagining a universe in which, a certain type of grammatical error, like or how about let me back off from that sentence and reconstruct it this way, like this particular disability, which would not be a mental illness, and would not be, dysgraphia, and would not be dyslexia, but whatever it is that this specific disability, might be called, it involved the inability, not to split infinitives, or to not split infinitives. If one wanted to put it that way, it would be probably more correct, right, in relationship to this particular conception. Like, this is the conceptual idea for this poem, that there's a disability that involves the inability to not split infinitives. And I guess I thought of this, artist statement 9, because because of this image, of Roosevelt Island. And so, I thought I would, utilize the text as the source material for that. And I've already explained, the procedural operation or method, for the improvisation. And I haven't actually read, the statement. So I'll be reading the statement, as I employ the operation. But see, I like that because then the improvisational aspect, comes out, and there's room for there's room for error and elaboration, right? And so the if was can become part of the and so we have to imagine that to split infinitive is a verb, right? To split infinitive is a compound verb. If to eventually evolve was to evenly enact. If to longingly look was to sincerely seek. If to seeingly skew was to fashionably favor. If to performatively prefer was to automatically apprehend. If to undividedly unify was to evenly evaluate. If to tenuously take was to deliriously desire. If to commonly come was to negligently know. If to actually attract was to indiscriminately interest. If to informally inform was to absolutely, marvelously art make. If to casually cut was to nonchalantly nourish. If to arbitrarily act was to causally create. If to center, if to continuously center on was to courageously circle around. If to completely claim was to confessedly can. If to tenuously try was to heroically hope. If to considerately construct was to exponentially explore. If to undecidedly undercut was to underdoggedly underlie. If to hopelessly hope was to questioningly question. If to appropriately approach was to heinously have. If to talkatively take was to climatically change. If to conditionally cause was to thankfully threaten. If to equilaterally evolve was to entirely evidence. If to sentimentally strive was to enticingly envision. If to disturbingly disinterest was to obtusely observe. If to enduringly endeavor was to extemporaneously exemplify. If to sincerely strive was to dearly desire. If to seemingly see was to, bless you, Leo, harmlessly have. If to psalmingly branch was to cutting roomly floor. If to piercingly perceive was to impotently possess. If to endearingly endow was to unalterably alienate. If to thankfully think was to determinately destroy. if to seemingly see was to casually conceive, if to defiantly determine, was to limitlessly lead, if to lovingly leave, was to split infinitive